Welcome everyone to NParks OneMillionTrees Webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us today on Zoom and also on YouTube. I am Bo Ting, and I'll be your host for this morning's webinar. The 1 Million Trees movement aims to restore nature back into our city through planting more than 1 million trees across Singapore by 2030. It's all part of our efforts to transform Singapore into a city in nature. City in nature is also a key pillar under the Singapore Green Plan 2030. We have planted over 380,000 trees so far since we've started in April 2020. And we are well on our way of hitting our target. So besides tree planting, the 1 Million Trees movement consists of online activities such as virtual tours and webinars like this one. So do check us out on our website, TreesSG, and follow us on our NParks social media channels for update. There will be links shared in the Zoom chat later by my colleague. So, International Day for Conservation of Mangrove Ecosystem will be happening on 26 July. That's 3 days from today. So, today we'll be commemorating this occasion by diving into mangrove habitats. We have with us today Ms Yang Shufen, Director of Sungei Buloh Wetland Reserve, Singapore's only wetland reserve, and home to a large diversity of mangrove species. She is joined by Mr. Sivasothi, Senior Lecturer at Department of Biological Sciences, National University of Singapore. He's an ecologist and more fondly known by many as the Otterman. Together with Shufen, we'll explore mangrove ecosystems in Singapore and how they form the front line of our fight against climate change. With Siva, we'll learn more about his experience galvanizing the community to protect and restore our very precious coastal habitats. After their sharing, we'll have a short Q&A session. So if you have any questions along the way, please send them to Rachel using the Zoom chat function. I think many of us are excited to hear from our speakers, so I shall not hold them back any longer. Shufen, over to you, please.
Thanks, Bo Ting. Yeah. Hi, very good morning to everyone. My name is Shufen here. I'm very happy to be able to share with you one of my favorite habitats in Singapore, which is mangroves. And literally, I hope to take you through a virtual mangrove tour of how these guardians of the coast continue to marvel and excite us about the way they grow and some of the benefits that they bring to us. And I'm equally excited about the human that's going to co-speak with me today, which is Mr. Sivasothi, who also constantly inspires us about mangroves and what we can do in Singapore. So without further ado, this is a mangrove in Singapore, in Khatib Bongsu, in the north part of our coast. But very often, the first question that comes up to us is, are there any more mangroves left in Singapore? In a typical urban setting, you might not have noticed this very understated habitats. If we go back a little bit in time, yes, in the 1800s, the mangroves are naturally covered in Singapore, which takes about 13% of the total land area. And by 1990s, it covers only about 0.5% of the total land area. But do not worry, what I'm going to show you is as of 2018, which is very recent. Today, we still have quite a fair bit of mangroves in Singapore. One of them that I would really like to share with you is our legally gazetted Wetland Reserve, Sungei Buloh Wetland Reserve in the north. But of course, it's not just there. There's Mandai Mangrove and Mudflat, Admiralty Park, and then moving eastwards, there's Khatib Bongsu, Pulau Selita, Pulau Ubin, and in the south as well. And in total, actually, the mangrove area has increased slightly to about 930 hectares, and compared to the total land area today, it's about more than 1%. That's good news. But exactly what's the state of the mangroves in Singapore today? So if you look at them, in Singapore, we are very blessed to still have the fringing mangroves. This is in the south. And riverine mangroves at high tide and low tide, and this is in the north in Sungei Buloh Wetland Reserve itself. You'll be rewarded with this look from the bridge. And more estuarine mangroves, which literally means mangroves that are growing along the river. And we still have interesting lakes where it's a basin where mangroves are surrounding it. And interestingly, in the Western catchment area as well, where we have dominant stands of mangrove forests and as well in Pulau. And one of the most interesting places that we are happy to share is the Mandai mangrove and mudflats, where they're associated mangroves with mudflats, with riverine mangroves, all in one in the northern part of Singapore. So what exactly are mangroves? They are basically tropical species of plants that are found on sheltered coastlines and estuaries along rivers. And although it is widely distributed in 128 tropical and subtropical nations, and in fact, it is a pretty rare habitat on a global scale. They covered less than 1% of all the tropical forests worldwide. And so if you earlier recall Singapore's figures, we have more than 1%. And these are plants which can be trees or shrubs. They include ferns and palms that usually grow in or adjacent to the intertidal zone, which is the area between high tide and low tide, and possibly a little bit more for the high tide on spring tide day. And in order for them to live literally between the tides, they need to develop special adaptations in order for them to survive in this environment. This environment includes the ability to soak and be covered and immersed in water, and not just fresh water, but seawater. So they need to be able to withstand the salt. And very often, they are also growing in very soft sediment, which is a very unstable environment. So how do they cope with it? So let's dive in to look at the mangrove flora of Singapore. Fortunately, we have many people who are very excited and very interested in mangrove flora in Singapore, and there are interesting resources that we can refer to. So I show you some of them here and summarize some of my favorite species. So the first one that I would like to share is the Rhizophoral species. The Rhizophoral species are well known for what we call the stilt roots or the flying buttresses on the right side of the screen. So this is one of the way, they're known as aerial roots, which allows them to be above the soil, giving them a chance to breathe when the water covers. And this also helps to stabilize them. And if you look at these interesting sticks that's on the tree in the middle of the screen, it looks like a fruit, but it's essentially not a fruit anymore. It is a seedling that is growing out. That means it has germinated while still on the mother tree. It is an interesting phenomenon known as a vivipary. And this is one of the strategies that a mangrove plant would use in order to cope with a harsh environment. So to give them a better chance at surviving in this environment. The next one is Sonoraceous species. So I spoke about having roots that breathe. So another interesting morphology that you can see in mangroves are sticks that comes out of the soil. So on the bottom left corner, you see a very muddy girl. That's me when I was much younger. And this interesting sonoraceous roots grow up to this high. They're very tall, and this helps them to cope in the mud as well as to breathe. And we call them nematophores. And this is also one of my favorite plants because they are pollinated by bats. And it's also well known that because they flower all throughout the year, this provides a good food source for the bats that will pollinate one of my favorite fruits, which is durian. And going more to food, if you look at the fruit itself, which is also known as sea apple, in some communities, it's also known that they actually fry them up and make them into cookies. The third genera or the group of mangrove species that you might see in the mangroves are known as the Progeria species. And what is very interesting is you look at the trunk, there tends to be many dots. And it is not a disease, it is the plant's way of coping with this environment, which is anoxic, very low in oxygen. So it allows them to breathe And these are actually lenticels that allow them to breathe. And similarly, you look at the roots adaptation, we call them the knee roots. It looks like kneecaps poking out of the soil. A very interesting phenomenon. And then on the extreme right side, once again, if you remember, that's not a fruit anymore, that's a propagule that has germinated from the mother plant. And it has very beautiful red flowers that's very well loved by the sunbirds. So if you take a visit to the mangrove, you can enjoy looking at the interesting root form at low tide. And then if it's on a nice sunny day, you can hear lots of birds singing. And one of the last very dominant species that you can see in mangrove, which is the Avicennia species. Similarly, they look like they have snorkels that's poking out of the mud. They are nematophores as well. And this allows the plant to breathe. And these are also pioneers of the mangroves. When a coast is actually suitable, or when you restore a mangrove, one of the first species that will come in to establish and grow very fast would be this species. And mangrove plants takes out about maybe 60 over 70 species globally, depending on how you define it as true mangrove and mangrove associates, are typically plants and species that are found in the mangroves, but they're not restricted there. They also come with interesting adaptation. For example, the one on the right side, which are pink fruits, that's kacang. It's like a kacang, which is a legume. And the leaf itself, sometimes if you look at the leaf surface, there's salt crystals. And what's happening is the plant actually excretes salt onto these leaves to cope with the water that they take in, which has high salt content. And of course, plants being one of what I call the basic framework architects of a habitat would form natural habitats for lots of animals. And one of the interesting animals, especially in Sungei Buloh, will be the migratory shorebirds that we host every season when they come by to winter. And besides being a natural habitat, supporting a high biodiversity of animals in the ecosystem itself, it provides a whole suite of ecosystem services. For example, climate change is a very hot topic now, and mangroves are increasingly given notice and awareness that they are actually a huge carbon storage. And actually, Singapore's mangrove itself also store lots of carbon. And many studies have also begun to show that it has the ability to reduce wave energy as well. At the same time, globally, we know that mangroves are an important source of timber, fuel, especially charcoal that we use for barbecue. They possess valuable medicinal properties. And I shared earlier about habitats. They are like the kindergartens and nurseries of the wild. Because it lives in the intertidal zone with lots of root systems that allow little fishes to hide. They're actually very important nesting grounds for small fish before they swim out to the open sea where they grow into adult. Culturally, especially also in Singapore, many people visit the mangroves as part of the nature reserve or nature park experience. It also contributes quite a fair bit to our scientific understanding of mangroves. And for example, even up to recent years, there are new species that have been discovered or being studied by scientists. So, given such rich ecosystem services or benefits to us, how do we actually manage this rich resource that, or what we call our natural capital that we are naturally endowed with in Singapore? So I would like to share with you some of the conservation management of mangroves that's been done in Singapore. And first of all, that would be to protect them. And very fortunately, as I mentioned earlier, there are 4 nature reserves in Singapore. This is one of the key strategy under the City in Nature to safeguard our natural capital. In Sungei Buloh is the only nature reserve with the mangrove habitats that's legally gazetted and protected. And on top of that, we move one step further to look at how can we strengthen core areas like the nature reserve by having buffer nature parks around it. So in this map over here, you see the Sungei Buloh Nature Park Network. The Sungei Buloh Nature Park Network was announced in 2018 by the Minister of National Development, that this, in order to strengthen our wetland habitats in the northwestern part of Singapore, we actually came out with a nature park network that will help to safeguard complementary wetland habitats in the northwestern part of Singapore, which includes the Kranji Coastal Nature Park, the Lim Chu Kang Nature Park, Kranji Marshes, and Mandai Mangrove and Mud Flat. And this was supported by some of the scientific work that we do to find out where are the rich areas in Singapore. So for example, I mentioned about the migratory shorebirds in Sungei Buloh, but actually they are mostly there at high tide. So in order to find out where do these birds go to and what other habitats do they need at low tide, we put the radio trackers on them and managed to track that these birds actually visit the Mandai Mangroves and Mud Flats at low tide, and at high tide, they fly back and roost at Sungei Buloh Wetland Reserve. And because of that, we know that these two wetlands are ecologically interdependent on each other, and it's important to safeguard them as part of the nature park network for long-term ecological resilience. But another aspect that is also very important is to promote love and awareness of this important habitat that we have. So some of the work that has been done, it's also working with community like you. We have volunteers who do guided walks, galleries that shows some of this richness that we have, and of course, habitat enhancement activities such as planting with community. And there will be inevitable that some of the habitats could be impacted for various reasons. So for example, in this area here, which is Kranji Coastal Nature Park, if you look on the extreme right side of the picture, that's the natural mangroves. However, there's a coastal erosion. And one way that we can do is to put a rock revetment behind the mangroves, just a very low slope to actually reduce the wave energy. But this rock revetment has also been designed to trap as much sediment as possible so that it can promote even more growth of mangroves. And one more step that we take when looking at coastal restorations is what would the natural habitat be like? Literally, what would Mother Nature do? So looking at it from a vegetation zonation, from land towards sea, you can see that actually it's made out of secondary forest before it meets the mangroves with a low rock revetment that we call like a hybrid nature-based solution. What we've done in this site is to design a coastal belt where it will be planted with a curated palette of coastal species so that it can form a very strong vegetation belt to buffer between both the sea and the terrestrial forest. And this is one of the projects under the 1 million tree program that we can share more about later by Siva. And I'd also like to end with this slide where we cannot emphasize more that to love and to protect our mangroves and our natural habitat, we really need to work with the community. So these are just two of the interesting social media groups that we work with the community where they actually share some of the sightings that they have on the Sungei Buloh Nature Park Network for Flora and Fauna. We also have a Singapore engraved flag sightings where citizen scientists share their sightings of birds with a green over white flag so that we can collect the data and better understand and protect our areas. And with this, I will hand over to Siva to share more about what you can do as a community. So handing over back to Poching and Siva.
Okay, thanks very much, Shufen. You've done all the hard work. Now I will share some stories. Right, the stories are from the community that has been working on mangroves in Singapore since the 1980s. So my title is Guardians of the Coast, just like Shufen, but Shufen talked about the mangrove proper. I'll talk about the people that did research, education, and coastal cleanups, and finally habitat enhancement. So the first thing I want to do is go back to the mangrove, so that Shufen talked about, and she mentioned the various kind of genera, right? So that form any mangroves in the region. But there's something special about Singapore's mangrove, and that is the zonation is so compressed because we are so small, right? So a zonation that you see typically in Malaysia will spread out over 10 to 30 kilometers. Isn't that wonderful? I mean, it's phenomenally large, right? So when I'm walking through those mangroves, it doesn't change for a long time, right? The composition of trees and the animals there are laid out in front of you for a similar composition for an extended period of time, right? So that's very helpful when you're studying mangrove, and you can come up with very nice zonation diagrams like this. But having studied those zonation diagrams when I was young, right, when I was an undergrad, then when I went to Singapore mangrove, it's like, really? It's a tiny little space, right? Maybe not 30 kilometers. If you're lucky at Mandai, maybe 300 meters. So all of that zonation is stuffed into a small space. Right? Now, the beauty of that, it means that at the boardwalk, you can take a very short walk and you've covered various zones. But be warned that some of the zones might be 1 tree wide, right? So it's served up to us very closely. And that's why, as I explored mangrove, I got a very intense education. It helped that I measured trees now. So when you measure tree diameter, you go to every individual tree, they become your friends. You start to see, oh, actually we do have zonation. It's just very compact. Now, so the Mangrove Boardwalk, it's a little secret of ours. It's an amazing place to learn about mangroves. Now, let me give you an example. The base of the boardwalk is a back mangrove, and the boardwalk heads out so that you can see the straits in the distance. Now, Murphy mapped these areas and came up with these maps, which I extracted. And you can see, okay, right at the back is the back mangrove, right? So where you're entering the boardwalk, right? Then there is a mud lobster mound system. You see these little hills. These are created by an animal called the mud lobster. And because the hills rise up above the tide, there are many animals that occupy that space. Then you have the main forest where you see a mix of species that Shufen describes. And then finally, in the distance, you see sandbanks. And on the sandbanks will be the Sonoracea trees, right? They're the ones that like to stretch out far into the sea. So that zonation is very intense. Oh, yes. And then I must mention that beyond the trees, where it's still muddy and there are no trees, and then that's your mud flats. So it's all served up to us in a very small space. Now, we have various species of fiddler crabs. Here are 4 that we highlighted in the Mangrove Guidebook that was published in 1999 because they are reasonably common, right? So everyone will be familiar with the orange fiddler crab. It's quite flexible. It will be in sandy, muddy substrate. Okay, then you have a rosy fiddler, which is found in back mangrove, a porcelain fiddler, which prefers the sandbanks, and then finally you have this purple fiddler, which is likes very soft mud. So amongst every faunal type, there will be diversification to take advantage of the very specific conditions. Now, in a place like our boardwalk, that condition is stuffed until they are neighbors, they are very close together. So imagine if you're a scientist from, any international scientist, you're studying a particular group of animals, and I say, okay, come, let's go for a walk. And then I'll just point out to them the different zones, all compressed within our mangroves. Now, you realize that, okay, animals adapt to different kind of substrate conditions, adapt to different kind of plants. So the thing is, it's not static. So if I go back 30 years later to a particular area, it may have changed. Now, one of the reasons for change is that plants exercise self-thinning. So the mom tree will release lots and lots of propagules, right? And then they'll settle down in high density, and then there's intense competition. So over time, it will get thinned out. So this is Mandai mangrove and mudflat. And within the area, there are it's beautiful to see recruitment. So this is what I call recruitment. The seedlings have taken root and they're growing. So this looks very good, right? But can't get attached to every individual seedling because when they grow up, some will get outcompeted, right? So this is these are mid-sized saplings, about 1 meter tall. I've sunk into the mud now, so it's actually 1 meter tall. And this is very soft mud now. And then, of course, when they are big, mature trees and they are spreading roots and nematophores, then that will cause even more spacing, right? So the substrate here is much firmer. You can walk on it quite easily, right? And you can see the nematophores, the pencil-like roots, they're all spread out, right? So one big tree will occupy a fairly big area, and the substrate changes. So what used to be maybe very soft mud has now become quite firm mud, and then there'll be different animals that utilize those conditions. So that's the exciting thing. You can see a lot of very dynamic changes very fast. Okay, so we've studied the mangrove quite well, right? We came out with checklists and all that. And you know, in Singapore, you can study quite well because we can go day and night, low tide, high tide, because you know in the past, okay, there's no tiger, there's no crocodile, and now have, but in the past. So when we examine an area, we examine it very thoroughly. If you talk to someone else from a big country, if they have large predators, then it's quite silly to go into the mangrove at night. At high tide is ridiculous, right? So we could do quite comprehensive work, and with the zonation squeezing everything into a tight space, we made lots and lots of discoveries. So this is a goby, right, from Pandan Mangrove, described by a world goby expert, Helen Larson. She's retired but still doing work. And it was wonderful to have this from Pandan Mangrove, which I tell you, is like 99.9% of that place disappeared. Okay, because we build a reservoir, we build residences, you know, in the very fast-paced development, post-independence, but a sliver remains, and that sliver is precious, right? And then you can see there's crab, right? So Peter Ng is our crab man. This is Christoph Schubert from Germany, also a crab man. So what we do is we don't just study our mangrove, we help our friends when they come. Right? And so they will do collections themselves. Christoph Schubert likes to do his own collections, and then he'll refer to material from the museum. And when he refers to material from the museum, they even go back to the 60s, where a crab guy called So Cheng Lam was quite active, right? So all this is at the Lee Kuan Yew Natural History Museum. And then when they're clear they have something new, then it's described, right? So sometimes it's not new to science. Science has found it, it's been described elsewhere, but just never discovered locally yet. So I was quite pleased when BN, a young researcher at the museum, and Nanki, my colleague at the department, described having discovered this. This is Heteropilumnus Sase Kumari. So I love this crab because it's like very hairy, right? It's quite tiny. These are really good photos that we take nowadays. And it's named after a famous mangrove guy in Malaysia who, you know, I sought out his advice. So it's like a mentor. Everyone loves him. And here he is at the opening of the Lee Kuan Yew Natural History Museum. Three great Malaysian scientists, Lim Buliat and David Wells, and this is Sase Kumar. So a crab that's named after Sase Kumar is found east and west of Singapore, must be here. So thanks to BN and Anki, yes, it's here, it's described, wonderfully well, and enters the record, right? Now, what about their ecology? We know so much about species, right? Because the taxonomies, once they find it, examine the material, okay, they found a species, right? But you look for the Haberma nanum species that was described, right? The ecology, all that's known is just the few notes that the taxonomies write, right? Which they acquired from experience hunting for the crab. When they hunt for the crab, they realize, oh, it likes this kind of substrate, that kind of, it's found in a certain zone within, and then they add whatever notes they can add, right? But it should require then for people to come and do ecology work, right? So I did it, and you know, I cheated. I took like the biggest crab I could find. So I was in this lab with Murphy and Peter Ng, and Cynthia Lee was the research assistant. She's very efficient. So when she was around, Murphy published a lot of very important material, including one on insect herbivory, right? Okay, so the crab is big. It's very thin shell. It's very thin. You cannot catch it by stepping on it. That's a no-no. It'll crack the shell. Why? Because this is a crab that's climbing trees. So remember how I told you got no tiger, right? And then at the time, no crocodile. So we going to the mangrove at night was like the norm. And then you go mangrove at night, my God, what are these crabs doing there, right? So I think I shared, right, in this slide. You look at the last line. This was honor supervision under Peter and Murphy's like this. Hey, I think this crab is climbing the tree. What's he doing? That's it, After that, you're on your own. So I start visiting the mangrove, and yes, they are climbing crabs, climbing trees. I differentiate them by their kila color. That was quite helpful. And I realized a pattern. They slowly will come up after night falls, right? So the only other person in the literature when I searched who observed this was Professor Yukio Nakasone. He observed this somewhere in Thailand. So in all of the literature. So the good thing is because Peter is a crab man, many crab visitors will come to do the taxonomy, look at the specimens and the literature and visit our forest, right? So I told Nakasone, you're the only one that noticed. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. Of course, the Episesama doesn't just climb in the day, doesn't just climb in the night, it climbs in the day as well, right? And during high tide, some of you may have seen this at Pasir Ris Mangrove or Sungei Buloh Mangrove, the boardwalks, right? In wonderful comfort. So this is the old boardwalk at Sungei Buloh. They've raised it now, right? They know about climate change and rising sea levels, so they raised the boardwalk. And what this means, right, when the tide is in, is that there are a lot of visitors to the mangrove. So Episesama is a resident. Then you have visitors, and all these visitors got big appetite, so they come in and they're looking for food. So, if you're a fisherman, rising tide, that's when you will put out bait because hungry fish are coming in. But this hungry fish can crunch up Episesama. So Episesama, look at it, it's come out of the water and it's like, it looks as if it's lifting its skirts, right? It's like, yes, there's danger in the water. And this danger, my God, this is a flower crab that you all know. The flower crab is always sold in supermarket dead, right? Because it cannot live out of air. It's got gills, it's dependent on water. So it cannot live in the mangrove, which gets dry half the time. It is a visitor, swims in, and this can tear Episesama in two, right? We know this because once I put Episesama in a tank, I didn't know the flower crab was there. Then he rushed out, grabbed hold, tore it in two. Remember, the shell is very thin because it's a tree climber. Okay, so if the water is rising, you really want to avoid these flower crabs. Then, you have kingfishers that will attack crabs. Now we have a lot of photographers with long lens, so they've taken photos. In Facebook, it's quite lovely to see. And my goodness, this monitor lizard looks very full, right? It looks like, wow, the tummy is all bloated. We had a PhD student, Rashid, and initially, I helped him catch monitor lizards, quite fun. Then we extract out of the cage, and then I put my t-shirt over the eyes so it won't struggle, right? Then we carried it back to Buloh, the lab. And then he pushed salt water into the gut to flush out the contents. And we're like, what is the monitor lizard eating? Oh my goodness, it's full of tree climbing crabs. We're like, wow, these tree climbing crabs are really supporting a lot of other life in the mangrove. And they eat leaves, so they are accelerating energy from the sun to the entire ecosystem. So Episesama is a very important crab. In fact, it's so important, my friend in Thailand, right, Piti Wong, he was a little bit concerned because the Thais eat crab. If you go to a Thai restaurant, you say, oh, I want salad with crab, right? Then you come with legs of Episesama. So at Chatuchak Market, I went to see, oh my goodness, so many crabs. So he was from Wallalat University and he was actually conducting studies to check, okay, what kind of impact is this having on mangrove when you take out what may be a keystone species, right? Here you can see, the ones with the orange extended mass in the abdomen, those are the eggs, right? Now, we did other studies and it was quite interesting because look at the gut, right? So inside the stomach of the crab, you have molars that look like your teeth and it's for grinding. So as a leaf eater, right? You can only tear, the crab can only tear, then stuff into the mouth. So the grinding happens in the gut, right? Fascinating. And you see, we got these honor students to study, did further study. So at that time, I was collaborating with the Ng Ki. She just passed on recently. So she had expertise for larvae and internal anatomy. So we used to supervise students together. And you notice they are in the mangrove at high tide. So this was the following year, we completed the study of the larvae, which Ng Ki is an expert on. So there's a lot of things to find out, and not just about Episama. There are other crabs running around within that space, so they kind of overlap. So if you look on the tree at night, okay, Episama is on the tree, right? 1 meter above, up to 4 meters. Now you look down at the base, not on the ground, you know, at the base of the tree, we find Metopograpsus, and this one eating algae, doesn't burrow at the base of the tree, right? Then you have Sesama species. Now this one only has one claw because the other claw was embedded in my student assistant's finger. This crab, oh, very aggressive. Of course, it's very distressing to us because we want the crab intact. So we learn to be very careful with this species. And this is found on the ground. So you see, you go on the tree, at the base of the tree, on the ground, and all eating and doing different things. So there's a lot of space. Once a tree grows, right, you have a lot of space. And there's many different niche for different crabs to use. Also for snails, also for insects. So, you know, if you start with a tree, you got a good thing going. Now, this is Selatium Broccoli. It's one of my favorites, right? Such a lovely crab. It's very good-tempered. It's not like mean and nasty like Sesama. And it's got these greenish emerald green eyes. And I used to see lots of them amongst the tree. So they hide in a crevice in the tree. Episama is in the burrow, it will climb up, right? But Selatium Broccoli is always on the tree. So you have a tree dweller, right? And yeah, even once I found it, they were feeding on ants. So, you know, we say, oh, this is a algae eater or there's a leaf eater, but sometimes if they are opportunistic, their diet can vary slightly, right? And yeah, so this is where I'll find Selatium Broccoli on the tree, coming out of the crevice, looking to scrape algae. And then competition is from Nerita, the snail. This is a algivore as well, right? Now, there are many, many different kinds of crabs. Some are carnivores, some are, leaf eaters, some are eating algae, right? And all that study was from many years of being in the mud. And then different kind of scientists come examine the material. Everywhere else in the region, people are publishing, and then we are able to put it all into a guidebook, right? But the high tide behavior was quite unique to Singapore. So when we shared the stories at International Crustacean Symposia, people were quite excited and interested. So that was very nice because it's out of Singapore. The species, the Episama species, named from Singapore as well. So it's a very special thing for us. One thing I just wanted to point out is that all these high tide work, you see, we are in the water, chest high. There's BC, right? BC means before crocodile. So after the crocodile came, then I sent my students go and study things like otters, hornbill, stroider boot. That one also very safe, because mangrove got crocodile. Right? And that's a photo by Bernard Sia, who I think is out there. You can go to the Buloh main bridge, and he's there on certain days, and he will share with you stories about crocodiles, right? But it completely changed the intimacy with which I could explore mangrove. Okay, so we try to put things into the Mangrove Guidebook, which was published in 1999. It's quite outdated, but it's still a very useful first guide, right? And then remember I told you species are still being discovered. Interesting story. This is the cover of the guidebook, and we thought this was the giant mud skipper. Occasionally as a stripe, then sometimes it doesn't have the stripe. But then it turned out the Thais realized this was a different species. So you have the cover of the guidebook, and we don't even know the mud skipper. It's a big animal, right? Mud skipper. And this was Perioptomus walalaki. It was a different species. The Thais had examined hundreds of fish because they were doing some diet studies. So they discovered and they describe it, and it's named after their university, Walala, right? So I find this so funny. Also, you will find Walala in areas where there are a bit of roots, If it's very soft mud, then you get the other species, a giant mud skipper. Okay, so just for you who's watching, there's a little secret in this photo. This was also taken chest high, you know, moving amongst the trees, and there's a little mosquito. So that's a hat tip to Ivan Polonin, a medical doctor who did extensive work studying communities where he was practicing medicine, and he wrote a National Geographic article about mudskippers in Singapore mangroves, right? A long time ago. Now, another funny story is, I told you, oh, 3 species, easy to differentiate. Then later BN and company, right, with Peter Ng and Namki, they said, hey, actually all along there's been 5 species right under my nose, right? So this came out like, you know, more than 15 years after I did my study. So it's time to revisit. You can't go in the mud, but maybe can try identifying and doing counts from the boardwalk. Now, all these ecology that we did, you know, there were snakes that were eating the crabs, and that led to Sir David Attenborough turning up in Singapore to include the story in Life in Cold Blood, right? Which was broadcast in 2008. So he came around 2008, 6, and NParks staff was very helpful, and we brought him in. So this is the lovely Rhizophoral that you can see in Sungei Buloh boardwalk. Every time we go there, we say, okay, this is the Attenborough tree. Now, there was a problem with trash, right? I mean, all this is very nice, but we are surrounded by lots of trash. It was very heart-wrenching to see, you know, horseshoe crabs entangled. I spent hours trying to release them. So when we first did our surveys and were mapping mangrove, look at the amount of trash there. This is the coastal trail at country, you know. Piles and piles of it. Part of it is the inheritance from when there were settlements, but also because Johor Straits, there's rubbish, and no one was visiting this area. This was no man's land. Sungai Buloh was restricted to the Buloh side, right? So the coastal trail that you see today was dead. The mangroves couldn't grow, right? So there was an international coastal cleanup exercise. Kate Tuma was the founder. So she asked me, can we go mangrove? I took her to Mandai. And then eventually we extended and came to Kranji because of Linda Go. And look at the rubbish there, right? Piles and piles. And it was like a major operation. We got people in the community, you know, to come. These are all the team leaders, you know. Then they are guiding volunteers. So it was very strict, 1:5 ratio. We designed quadrats. It was like a battalion exercise. And then some kids, we say, okay, you go make living room because so many funny things. So they made living room, they made bedroom also. And then later on, they made a garage, right? Take photos and like, you know, highlight the problem. And all of this data was consolidated. You can see this ironic consolidating the data. She's still doing it 20 years later. And then look at all that rubbish. How to remove, we can't trudge out of there, will cause too much impact. So we use canoes and boats, right? And of course, when people come back, that time got no bridge. So this is like washing machine. We do river crossing and then all the mud is washed off them. So they are not so dirty anymore, right? Now, this went on for years, you know. And we spread to nearby areas in Kranji East. Look at all the people who would come and support this. This is amazing. Amazing volunteers who, you know, knew that it's going to be a tough job. So gradually, we spread to other mangroves in Singapore, including Pandan in the south, right? And Sungai Buloh in 2014 took over the area. Wow, such a relief. By now, the trash load was so low, Buloh can handle annual recruitment. They still need help now. So if you want to join, go to Facebook, look up International Coastal Cleanup. Little green men still conduct mangrove cleanups there. But it's not as frightening what you saw, right? So Buloh is so clean. And we brought international visitors here from the Mangrove Conference, and they loved it. I mean, you know, Singapore, we know our mangroves are quite beat up, but many people loved it, right? And there was so much they could learn. It was amazing. And you know, with NParks in charge of the area, you know, Shufen has shared, okay, there's erosion, let's go and deal with it. Then she said something else. How do we mimic Mother Nature? So if you look at the maps of the area, on the western bank of the Kranji River, this is when it's open, 1966, there's a nice mud flat there. Right, 1971, still there's a mud flat, right? And then 74, oh, there's a dam. So we dammed it in 72, but you look, the area still got mangrove, right? But you see this area is being reclaimed. right? That's to support the reservoir works. And you can see this is a very large area that was reclaimed, so all scrubland. And that's when NParks went in and said, okay, let's clear the scrub and let's mimic Mother Nature, right? So what Shufen is referring to is they're actually introducing a coastal forest because that's the best fit for the conditions then. So we threw our lot in with them. We say, hey, that's a wonderful project. You know, we did so much work, the trash there, we want to come in, right? And then they let us come in. And, you know, as we do this dedicated work, we remember all of those who came before us, contributed so much in terms of research and education and encourage activism. So it's a very, memorable, very meaningful thing, right? So I invite you to join us, NUS Study Cats. You can go to the webpage. In fact, this Saturday, today is Saturday, right? Yeah, still got 3 places. People pull out because of COVID. You want to come, you join us. Ticket sales open until 1 p.m. So we'll all trudge down later, and I hope you can join us and be part of this community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Siva, for that very insightful and inspiring sharing, as well as Shufen for showing us the flora and restoration efforts of our mangroves. Now it's time for my favorite part of the OMT webinar, which is the Q&A. I apologize in advance if we are unable to answer every question, as we had quite an overwhelming response. So for our first question, could you share some interesting insights from restoration efforts being carried out for mangroves in Singapore? Shufen, you have shared quite a bit about some restoration efforts. So is there any interesting things that you have learned from it?
Thanks, Boting. Yeah, we have done a couple of restoration projects around some of the mangroves. For example, one project that we did was in Buloh Mangrove more than 10 years ago, where there was also very severe erosion. And it is one of the really precious mangroves that we have in northeastern part. And similarly, we designed like a rock revetment that we keep it as low footprint as possible, just to abut the coastline. And we also tried our best to design a template based on the zonation that Siva shared. So which were the species will be right in the front, which were the species in the mid zone, and which is the one at the back. But after the project 10 years later, I shared earlier about the crunchy one. You notice that we are now planting the coastal forest, and I didn't mention too much about us planting the mangroves. So one of the insight would be that as more research and as more project goes by, we learn that another way could be to deploy a technology that we call agent-based modeling, where looking at the whole Sungei Buloh Nature Park network is actually very well endowed by other mangroves that can introduce propagules into the system. So based on the modeling, it showed that actually the Mandama flat mangroves has propagules carried by the wave through the hydrodynamics of the water to Kranji. So once we tackle the energy and with the rock revetment, the propagules will actually settle and recruit. So Siva also shared about recruitment. So if you join us at Kranji, you will see there's a line of mangroves today, 2 years later after we finish the rock revetment. And this is one of the insights that we learn and we try to improve as we do each new restoration project.
So for our next question, one member of our audience would like to know if there are other plans to restore mangroves besides protecting the current habitats. Shufen, maybe you'd like to comment first.
Okay. So I'll take this one again. So besides in Sungei Buloh, other plans to restore the mangroves can include places like Pulau Ubin. So in the northern part of Pulau Ubin, there's also erosion. So we are going to restore the mangrove over there. Similarly, each site is different. We need to study, for example, the substrate in the area. Is it sandy mangrove? Is it mud sediment mangrove? What is the wave energy in the area? Then we will design a way to restore and based on the natural ecosystem. And in the south of Pulau Ubin, there's also all disused aquaculture pond, for example, that originally were mangroves. So another project in that old disused aquaculture pond would be to restore it by understanding the hydrology of the site. So this method that we'll be doing upcoming will be the EMR, which is Ecological Mangrove Restoration. And that's also ground-led by the Restore Ubi Mangrove, which is RUM, a community partnership with the Friends of Pulau Ubin. Yeah.
And Siva, you have been doing quite a bit to protect mangrove habitats. Do you have other plans to, restore habitats?
Yeah, we take the lead from NParks, so it's been very exciting, the sort of projects they've initiated. And then what we do is we look at a project and then we see whether we can chip in. So we normally hear about this early when they consult maybe like the scientific community, or there's a stakeholder engagement at Ubin. Then that's like early warning, hey, something like this is going to happen. Then we can think of ways to contribute. So for example, Little Green Man had come for the planting, seeing the trash along the revetment, right? It's not easy to clear, it's essentially like hand-picked, right? So they are organizing mangrove cleanups with Sungei Buloh support. And, of course, they keep special lookout for the crocodile when they do it. The other things is, of course, like looking at what Buloh was doing, actually it's very important that the Habitat Enhancement Program has good support. So we don't just go plant a tree and then leave, right? We stay, we come back. How is the tree doing? Is it getting crowded by weeds, which are, when the area is first open, the grass is phenomenal. It just will cover everything, right? And it can grow up. The pioneers can grow up to heights of 1.5 meter or more. So then we say, hey, we think it's important to do this. And now we go every fortnight. And it's working out really well. So we just need, NParks will send one of their staff to be there, right? Just in case that's NParks being hospitable. But we are able to run the site with team leaders, and team leaders simply, the regulars have come and they've stepped up, and it's very nice to see. So we can't just okay, we conserve an area, right? Draw a circle around it, and okay, NParks carry on now. The amount of work and effort that's required is a lot. So volunteers are able to contribute very, very well. And, there are different things for different folks. So some people want to just look at birds and you see them photographing the lake tags, and that helps. David Lee has a Facebook page for it. So there's a diversity of ways you can contribute. But I think the important thing to realize is this is not some facility that's built and maintained by a contractor. It's much more than that. And I think all of us must find ways to, there's so little mangrove left, right? You heard from Shufen. So what we have is so precious, yet it's so productive, got so much of value. So getting involved and doing something regularly over the longest time is what we can do for mangrove restoration, right? In a variety of ways. So I told you why I'm so enthusiastic about the tree planting. When the tree comes in, right, then the rest can follow. They have a space, they have food, they have protection. Yeah.
It's interesting to hear that there's such a diverse range of activities that actually go into protecting and restoring our habitats. Right. So this question I probably come from somebody who's from academic side of things. What would be a useful scientific study to undertake that would benefit our current understanding on mangroves in Singapore? Maybe Siva, you'd like to take this since you're a lecturer at NUS.
Oh, okay. When we look at mangroves and we have students who want to do research, then what we try to do is we will identify things. So we just go for a walk. And I tell you, it's so simple. We don't know what snails do. We don't know if mangrove crabs stick to one tree or whether they're moving around. Now, all of this kind of information, which is basic ecology or biology of the animals and plants, you'll be surprised how important it actually is. Simple thing like, when do mangrove plants flower? And then, when they flower, who's pollinating? What kind of insects are coming? So, throughout terrestrial Singapore, there's community in bloom, and, they urge people, okay, go and count butterflies, dragonflies in your little garden plot, right? Because if we do it regularly over time, then we have an idea of what is coming. If things are still the same, or new things are coming. And then all of this ultimately can help management. So if you want to do a project, almost anything about biology, ecology will help. Now, the reason why I'm being quite broad is that for every project, you have to think about what is practical, right? So if you find, okay, there are kids willing to go and identify crabs, right? Then you don't want them wandering on the mud or get eaten, right? So, okay, stick to the boardwalk and then find out, okay, what kind of species we want to monitor from the boardwalk. So, for example, the mud skippers around the Mangrove Boardwalk at Buloh, it used to be mostly giant mud skippers, you know. It used to be mostly walalaki, right? Because there's a lot of roots and all that. But when trees fall over, then as the wood degrades, what you get is very soft mud. And giant mud skipper likes it. So they come in and then they build their nest. So remember I told you mangroves are dynamic. So if you have people doing regular surveys, then we can understand what's happening in our mangrove.
And Shufen, any comments from you?
Yeah, I think basically what would benefit our current understanding of mangroves, as Siva has shared, all these small little parts of the story help us each time to better manage the areas that we have. So, you know, Siva made share about like how the crabs are using different parts of the ecosystem, which is why I think a simple application you will notice as if you visit a mangrove site managed by us is we don't remove the logs or we don't remove some of the fallen trees because they form a habitat based on scientific studies like that. And that's why every small part helps. But of course, on a larger scale, there are other longer term studies. For example, in the context of climate change, there is also a marine climate change science program that looks at the long-term effects or some of the impacts and the natural ecological resilience, how mangroves will respond. Yeah, and that helps us in better understanding and therefore designing perhaps a new nature-based solution.
Thank you. I hope this gives everyone a better idea on what sort of studies you can undertake, and hopefully this will inspire more contribution of data to the understanding of mangroves in Singapore. So
maybe I just want to add something. So you might be that secondary school kid that did some counts of which bees were coming to pollinate a Progeria flower. Then later on, you know, you come to NUS or NTU and you're approaching a supervisor and they're like, oh, you're quite familiar with mangrove. Huh? Okay, let's figure out a project for you which has got a higher meaning. We'll sit down in Shufen and then figure something out. And then you might say, hey, I want to be involved, and you end up in the nature-based solutions center where you're doing your graduate studies and then later directing things. So I think it's quite important to encourage people to try something at any age, and then some will have the inclination to do dedicated quantitative work. Then you know, okay, this one can definitely do research. Someone else you take, right, be hopeless at collecting data, but when they tell you story, wow, it's so exciting, then okay, this one we need these kind of naturalists as nature guides.
And for our next question, I think it's quite apt given the heat wave going on in Europe. Yeah, I think it's a matter of time that, you know, climate change will affect us, and how are mangroves affected by climate change, and how can they help us against climate change? Maybe Shufen, you'd like to answer this first?
Sure. It's a big question, how are mangroves affected by climate change? And fundamentally, is it going to be a positive effect or a negative effect? So for example, climate change resulting from the increasing temperature, mangroves being plants, if the temperature increases and it's tropical, they actually grow faster, but to what limit? Above a certain limit, it will be too hot and the plants will suffer and they might not grow well. Another effect of the climate change is the corresponding rise in sea level, which is the water. And earlier we shared that mangroves are a unique habitat that is already having adaptations coping with the inundation, that means being immersed in the water for a period of time. And therefore, there's also some hypotheses and studies ongoing to see how they will respond. Is there going to be a coastal squeeze where the mangroves need to retreat to higher level. And I also shared that we are interested in sedimentation as well. So one of the impact is whether the mangroves will be able to grow in tandem with the sea level rise, increasing their sediment so that they can go higher. And how can they help us against it, which is the positive ecosystem benefits that they provide. So technically, if we can figure out the science, understand better about our mangroves, we'll be able to leverage and reap the benefits that these natural coastal defenders can give us, or we call it our guardians of the coast, right? Nice that your question went back to our title.
Siva, anything to share on this climate change? Siva, I think we can't hear you.
Yes, there's a lot of talk about climate change, resilient, nature-based solutions, and all that. And I think one thing to understand is what the ecologists are saying is you have a tool. So depending on your needs, you can actually deploy a nature-based tool. So what Shufen explained, right? So you know properties of mangrove. In your solutions, you don't have to think just about hard structures. So engineers and biologists are coming together so that they can widen the arsenal of solutions, right? So the engineers become familiar, then they realize, oh, can we deploy this here? So a very interesting thing is a slope in NUS, in Science Drive 4, right? The slope is not stabilized by any artificial structure. The slope is stabilized by the choice of plants that were used in the area. So now it looks like a forest. It used to be all open. It looks like a forest, and birds and butterflies are coming, and the slope is stable. So that's an example, very simple example of nature-based solution. The botanist in NUS Hutan had advised the planting. So then that was a very nice, sensible solution, and it has cooled everything down in that little spot. So, but if you're not familiar, if you just did engineering, right, then you have to think about solid infrastructure to provide those solutions. So, what Shufen talks about is what we talk to engineers about, so that they realize, oh, okay, there are all these other solutions. So, Lee Hsien Loong, our PM in National Day Rally, I think it's 2019, he talked mainly of hard solutions. So everyone panicked. Then they all said, on Twitter, everything, they're saying, hey, what about nature-based solutions? Wow, within days, they said we are considering nature-based solutions. And then the dialogue has gotten more complex. We now have a center. Everyone's getting engaged. NParks is providing their input. But the thing is, I can't tell you what they're going to do at Buloh yet, or Pasir Ris or elsewhere, right? These are things they're going to have to study and then figure out. And then with the arsenal of tools, which include the natural solutions, then they'll deploy. So it's going to be very exciting. PUB is in charge in Singapore, and they're pulling all these people together. So when we see the solutions that are being deployed, right, it's going to be quite exciting.
I totally agree. I think nature-based solutions have a lot more potential than what most people perceive it to be. And the 1 million trees movement is actually about nature-based solution by planting trees to combat climate change. And yeah, unfortunately, this has to be our last question due to time constraints. So once again, thanks a lot, Siva and Shufen, for sharing and answering the questions from our audience. And for our audience, if you'd like to learn more about mangroves, we have so much more resources online on our YouTube channel that you can watch. I think the bird ringing one is actually quite interesting because it's so much research work going on to understand where the birds go and how they use our mangrove and wetland habitats. Yeah. And for those of you who have been inspired by Siva and Shufen, and you like to do more and make a difference, you can actually join the 1 Million Trees movement. So check out our website, TreesSG, or connect with us on NParks social media channels. You can also scan the QR code over here to sign up for our mailing list. And before we go, we would really like your honest feedback on the webinar today. We hope to deliver engaging and relevant content to you. So you can help us a lot by sharing with us your feedback. You may scan the QR code or follow the link sent in the Zoom chat to complete a short survey for today. A million thanks to everyone, and we hope you have a great day ahead. Thank you.